Brown's Body, sung by J.W. Myers. John Brown's body lies among.
Ironically, the song John Brown's Body may have been written before the old man was even born.
That's how long it took to make stuff back in the day.
Let me explain. It's not known exactly when the melody was written, but the Glory, Glory, Hallelujah refrain started showing up in songbooks around the turn of the 19th century, with songs like Say Brothers, Will You Meet Us, popular on the American camp meeting circuit. Some musicologists chronicle Say Brothers as coming from an African-American folk song, which makes sense because the call and response singing style was typical of field songs and spirituals sung by enslaved Americans.
Also, like some of the field songs, Say Brothers, Will You Meet Us carried a discreetly disguised anti-slavery message through the Canaan's Happy Shore refrain. When it evolved into a John Brown tribute, the anti-slavery message became obvious.
This mixing of the Americas is the engine to the musical journey we're going on today. Music has always been a universal bridge between people.
Music unites us.
Well, it doesn't always unite kids and parents.
It unites the kids.
Not only did the call and response singing style work great for churchy music and work songs, but it also works for marching soldiers.
Which is where the first iteration of the lyrics for John Brown's Body came from. Written by soldiers, some of the lyrics were a little coarse. So over the years, they were rewritten by other people.
One person who rewrote those lyrics was William Weston Patton, an abolitionist, scholar, pastor, and former president of Howard University. Patton's lyrics were an improvement to the moldering and decay-based lyrics of the soldier tune, but through my cruddy old earbuds, they seem a little white saviory.
So we updated them for wokeness. Okay, so the melody was alive and well before John Brown was born. And the lyrics have been changing for 160 years ever since he died. But let's back up a little bit and look at where the original music came from. The plains, prairies, and plantations before the Civil War was even a blip on a telegraph machine.
Drums and voice were the earliest musical instruments pretty much everywhere, but certainly in the Americas and in Africa. Dance is their global kissing cousin. Together they express not only art, but storytelling.
I mean, this is the oldest form of community, is storytelling around the campfire, is song and music, and this is how we tell our stories and create empathy between us and pass on knowledge from generation to generation. I mean, it's fundamental to who we are as a species, and arguably a big part of the reason for our evolution. I mean, our brain's capacity to create is wholly unique.
Storytelling and art are not the only types of communication that drums were used for.
It's the drum, one of the oldest instruments in Africa and around the world. The drum was used for communication. It was used to bring about celebrations and ceremonies. It was used at funerals. It was used at official activities of the state. It was also used at the onset of war. This drum, being a very versatile drum, is called the djembe. And the djembe is known because of its sound. It can produce a sharp sound like that, or it can produce a bass sound like that. And that's one of the things why it's such a versatile instrument.
That communication mechanism was built in to the drum rhythms that came from West Africa, along with the black people who were separated from their families and enslaved in the Americas. Enslavers in this so-called New World understood the power of drums as a communication tool, so they confiscated drums from people they wanted to subjugate.
But You can't keep a good drummer down. He's going to find some way to communicate. And that's what they did. They found ways to communicate. They would beat on their chests. They would clap their hands. They would stomp their feet. There was all kinds of rhythms that they would use.
Drums and drumming aren't the only musical inspiration retained from Africa either. West African people also made banjo-like instruments like the ones they had at home. Those early banjos were made with gourds, sticks, and strings that were tuned with various loops tied into them. The instruments quickly gained the features of European stringed instruments, notably a fingerboard and tuning pegs. It also gained a drum head stretched over a wooden ring.
John Brown was determined, undaunted, true and brave, and Kansas knows his valor when he fought her rights to save. Now even though the grass grows long and green above his grave, his truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
European instruments, like the violin, found their way into the hands of black musicians, who worked them into Caribbean polyrhythms that became cakewalk dances. As African banjos and European violins mingled around the campfire, the two became inseparable. In Civil War camps, those banjos and fiddles were joined by percussion, woodwind, and brass musicians from the marching bands. Like African drums, marching bands were used for communication on the battlefield, information, and even at supper time.
Though hopefully, that's not the chow call.
Military bands were popular with Europeans and also with Americans, once America became a thing. Before the Civil War, marching band music reflected the influences of 18th century Europe. After the Civil War, it embraced the syncopated rhythms that the black people were playing in the Americas. During the Civil War, a shift to patriotic music ruled the airwaves. And that's where John Brown's body burst into popularity. Originally made up as a way to poke fun at Sergeant John Brown in Massachusetts' 2nd Battalion,
The Tiger Battalion.
It grew into a Union soldier anthem. Frederick Douglass said of the song,
He was with the troops during that war. He was seen in every campfire, and our boys pressed onward to victory and freedom, timing their feet to the stately stepping of old John Brown as his soul went marching on.
John Brown's body lies moldering in the grave, while wept the hope of liberty he ventured off to save. But though he lost his life while struggling for the day, his truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
In a strange twist of history, the Civil War ended on John Brown's birthday, May 9th. Sort of. That's when President Johnson declared it over and ended amnesty for former Confederate soldiers. Official word of the war ending didn't reach all those who were emancipated for more than 2 years, till June 19th, 1865.
That's where Juneteenth came from. But that's another story.
The Emancipation Proclamation may have spelled freedom on paper, but the proclamation didn't define how all these newly freed people would attain reasonable housing or fair employment. It just sort of proclaimed that they had the right to it. Unfortunately, rights often become wrongs, and that's where the blues came from. Freedom now meant prison. Prison meant voter suppression. Voter suppression meant that freedom was an illusion. Music offered an opportunity. It was a direct line out of the sharecropper trap and a direct way to earn a living.
With the freedom to travel at their own risk, many musicians took to the road, playing a refined version of the protest and work songs of the bad old days.
And that's where juke joints came from.
The new music flowing from the juke joints followed the call and response singing style of field songs and spirituals.
But musically, it was something new. Those new songs revolved around what we would call the blues scales, but what most 19th century music scholars called
That's not a scale.
The blues scale broke the traditional rules of scales because of blue notes. Flattening third, fifth, and seventh notes didn't fit the 18th century definition of a musical scale.
But the hoity-toity musicians poo-pooed it.
The regular blue-collar musicians, though, they frickin' loved it, and the blues seeped deep into America's musical soil.
Country music blossomed in that soil. So did ragtime, jazz.
Those early blues pioneers created something that would change the world forever by breaking the so-called rules. Born from multicultural roots, blues was expressed diversely too. Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith were two early pioneers, joining the likes of Son House, Blind Lemon Jefferson, and Charlie Patton. Perhaps the best-known juke joint pioneer, though, was Robert Johnson, who is said to have made a deal with the devil in a Louisiana crossroads to become the greatest songster alive. He did little to dispel that notion while touring the juke joints, and it was cemented into legend when he was poisoned to death at a juke joint outside Greenwood, Mississippi. Blues music broke the rules of music. It also broke through racial barriers to give a common musical voice and language to the United States. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last.
John Brown, sunset, dawn of liberty, winds of social justice blow sea to shining sea. Winds become a hurricane, all people will walk free. His truth is marching on. Glory, 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 hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory.
Blues wasn't the only music happening after the war. Marching bands were suddenly out of a job and looking to jam.
And that's where ragtime came from.
After the war, marching band instruments were in heavy surplus, and African Americans, mostly around New Orleans, created ragtime music. A happy, upbeat, syncopated, and sophisticated big band style that the American Federation of Musicians quickly voted to suppress. Like every other form of African-American music that was destined for greatness, ragtime was met with initial horror until it wasn't. Eventually, a common love of ragtime music brought black and white people together, even if it separated kids and parents.
1, 2, 3, 4. Jazz blossomed from ragtime, pollinated by the blues.
As jazz musicians moved to northern cities, the music acclimated to the regions. Dixieland, big band, West Coast swing. By the 20s, jazz was swinging worldwide.
Whoa, yeah. He captured Harper's Ferry, his 19 men so few, and fighting over Virginia till she's trembled through and through. They hung him for a traitor, themselves the traitor's crew, but his truth is marching on.
The call and response field singing of pre-emancipation wasn't a direct route to the blues and jazz, though. It kind of led to that crossroads where Robert Johnson found himself. One road led to neon lights,
And the other road led to church.
The movement that he started, he looks down upon to view. Black lives matter is resoundingly ringing true, and heaven rings with anthems of equality and truth. His truth is marching on.
Probably the most important anthem of equality and truth is Lift Every Voice and Sing, the Black National Anthem. Written in 1900 as a poem, it was performed with music for the first time on Lincoln's birthday in 1905. The song is a prayer of thanks, evoking the exodus from slavery to freedom in the Promised Land.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
His truth is marching on.
The first road, the Devil's Road, kept leading to places that no parents approved of.
Blues and swing morphed into rhythm and blues, jump blues, and boogie woogie, which was collectively called race music by white people.
Black people called it rhythm and blues, jump blues, and boogie woogie.
Rock and roll as a term wasn't coined until the 1950s, but the first rock and roll song may have been recorded in 1939 when Pete Johnson and Joe Turner recorded Roll'em Pete. I don't think that's what they were talking about. I think it was this. What evolved into 1950s rock and roll was called a cultural collision of white and black music. But really, it was more of the same. Great music invented by black musicians, rejection by the parents, and mass adoption by the kids.
But this time felt a little different. After the Great Migration from earlier generations, diversity was baked into cities like St. Louis, Memphis, Detroit, and New York City, where early rock and roll flourished.
So yeah, rock and roll came from, bluesy Delta style, stuff like that. And it's been around for a long time, but it all kind of changed when guitars started looking like that. And the reason why is these riffs were possible. It spread over to England and pretty much all over the world at that point. But, when I first got turned onto it, it was the British bands from the 60s and 70s, Rolling Stones, Bowie, Led Zeppelin, that kind of stuff. And the funny thing is, Keith Richards was so into American blues, Chuck Berry. We turned him onto it, and they turned us onto it. So it's just an endless cycle.
It's an endless cycle that has spurred creative growth and excitement for new music for centuries.
In another endless cycle, parents thought it turned kids toward the devil because they were shaking their hips, twitching their lips, showing their slips.
Champions of freedom go strike for truth today. So the death blow to oppression in the present time and place. Dawn of old John Brown is brightened into day, and his soul is marching on. Marching on and on and on and on. Yeah, this one.
America's popular music has come from or been deeply influenced by the minds and muses of African American musicians. Hip-hop was no exception. Rap music was the latest black music to scare the hell out of suburban parents, but really, it was the language of struggle. It was about breaking out of old musical norms and building something new. And even though nobody likes it, it's the most popular form of music in the world.
For truth and justice, we sing the song. If you believe, you can sing along. It's oppression, it's despair. It's John Brown that we want to share. And his sacrifices were not in vain. And his legacy, it will remain. And his truth keeps marching on.
Watch this.
Pete!
Yo, Jacques, listen. John Brown was a definition of private living. Stuck to the mission of freeing slaves from the opposition. Following dreams that would seem off in the distance. And hopping over the obstacles, keeping people diminished. He was more than a man who had made personal sacrifice. Legacy of justice that followed him to the afterlife. Morally compelled to do better, felt like he had to fight. Hungry for a better future, change was his appetite. We the people of a nation, repeating mistakes. We try to push each other down into the ground brace. But John Brown was pulling people up. He was tough, went against the norm regardless of how his people judge. Staring in the eyes of another race. And his truth keeps marching on.